They are a well-polished weapon in the trenches of Canadian politics. Attack ads, a fresh one against the newly elected Liberal Party leader Justin Trudeau, provoked a backlash on social media over the ad's negative tone. But the Conservatives certainly aren't the only Canadian political party to use these weapons. Here now to tell us more about the efficacy of these tactics, David Herle, principal partner at the Gandalf Group and co-chair of the Liberal Party of Canada's 2004 and 06 campaigns. David, good to have you back here at TVO.
Great to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Well, Justin Trudeau won, and a day later, people got to see this.
Justin Trudeau. He was born with a famous name. But does he have the judgment to be Prime Minister? He said he'd think about making Quebec a country. He didn't like the word barbaric to describe cultural violence against women. He even said this.
Quebecers are better than the rest of Canada because, we're Quebecers or whatever.
Yes, nothing says good judgment like saying one region is better than another. Justin Trudeau, he's in way over his head.
Okay, how would you characterize that ad?
That's a personal attack ad, right? It's aimed directly at, it's not an issue comparative ad. It's not in any way a policy-focused ad. That is purely a, does this person have the personal attributes and character to be the Prime Minister?
If you knew very little about politics and just sort of followed it in a cursory basis from time to time when things get newsworthy, would that ad be effective?
Well, I mean, is it effective? It probably is not, to be honest. I know a lot of people will think it is. I'm a big believer that negative advertising can be very effective, but they're not all effective. This one works on sort of two different levels, and I suspect the visuals are more effective than the audio. The audio component questions his judgment and really doesn't provide a lot of evidence. Negative ads to work have to have a core of truth to them that the recipient of the ad sees as a core of truth in it. So the ads about Michael Ignatieff not being here for you wouldn't have worked if there had not been something that Canadians sensed about that as well, that sort of rang true with them in some way. I don't think there's any real evidence here in this ad, especially given the very powerful earned media backlash that has occurred against the ads, that Trudeau doesn't have good judgment. I think, though, that on a visual level, they're going for something completely different.
Which is what?
Which is, I think that they're raising visual questions about his toughness. They're almost making him look effete. They're questioning his masculinity in a way that is probably designed to appeal to a certain base. They even used the lettering and typeface from the new Liberace movie that is going to be on HBO, and I don't suspect any of that is inadvertent. So I think, they may be planting some seeds with some men about whether or not he's like them or whether he's a different kind of character that they don't identify with. But I don't think the question of judgment is probably landing the way they might have wanted it.
Which presumably could work if 20% of the public knew who Justin Trudeau is. But 95% of the public knows who this guy is, right? His name recognition is off the charts. So does that help him in this regard?
Well, it helps in that he's not a blank slate in the way that some of the previous people that were victims of these attacks have been. You're right. Most Canadians feel that they know something about him, not as much as they'd like to know about him, and they're just learning about him. The question is whether or not this is helpful to them coming to a decision or not. And I doubt that many people who might be within the target group for the Liberal Party are going to find this is the kind of information that's going to help them make up their mind.
So help us get inside, I know you're a Liberal, but help us get inside the calculus of the Conservative Party here. We're at least 2, maybe more than 2 years away from the next election. So what's the thinking behind getting out the day after he wins a leadership with this kind of piece?
Well, I'm not sure, because I actually wouldn't have, if I was the Conservatives, come out as quickly as they did with an advertisement. There's a lot of reason to believe that when you've got a story running in the media and then paid advertising on the same subject matter, that really what the paid advertising does is serve to remind people of all the news coverage, which is inherently more credible than advertising than they've seen. And Mr. Trudeau was, when this ad was launched, in the midst of getting a wave of positive publicity about it, about his leadership, about winning the leadership, and about his entry into the House of Commons. And so I'm not sure that they wanted to be just sort of prompting people to think about Justin Trudeau more than they already were. So I think the timing is probably suspect. Do you want to get in and take a little bit of the shine off of somebody when they're really perhaps not prepared to defend themselves? The Liberal Party doesn't have a lot of money right now. The Liberal Party is probably unable to respond in kind in terms of the volume back. So there's an advantage there that they may be wanting to take a hand in. And as much as we've said that Justin Trudeau is a more known quantity than Mr. Dion was or Mr. Ignatieff was, he's still not a completely known quantity, and there's lots that people need to learn about him yet. And so they probably thought, let's get in there and add a little bit of information to people's understanding of him. Let's have our own hand in the framing of Mr. Trudeau, if you will.
Maybe we're looking too deeply at this. Could it be something as simple as he's won? The Liberals are actually first place in the last public opinion poll I saw. We're going to need money as the years go on. This is great for fundraising. Is that possible?
Well, it's kind of a risk. I mean, if you were going to use it for fundraising, I'm not sure. It looks like there's a pretty significant media buy behind this commercial. I was curious about that when they first launched it, whether it was one of these things that you release and give to the media so that they put it on their news programs and then you just put it on the web and don't actually put any money behind it. But it appears that there's a substantial media buy behind this. And so I don't think you would do that just for fundraising purposes, because of course all political communication and negative ads are no different in this regard. Say something about the person you're talking about, and they say something about you as well. And so I think that one of the things that they have conveyed through this is that while they may not have much respect for Justin Trudeau, they are somewhat threatened by Justin Trudeau.
Or they wouldn't be doing this.
Or they wouldn't be doing it. And so I think that that's an interesting thing for a governing party to be saying about the leader of a third party.
Okay, let's remind everybody that one of the first things you said was this is a definite negative personal attack ad.
Yeah.
There are other attack ads which attack a person's position on a particular issue. Can you tell us which of those two is more effective? The ones that attack the person, him or herself, or the ones that go after a particular position on an issue?
Well, I think that they can both be effective. I think that it's a lot trickier to execute a personal attack ad in a way that people find acceptable. The general reaction one gets to negative advertising, the whole umbrella, from people is, why are you doing that? Why don't you tell me good things about yourself? Quit running down your opponent. And anybody that has tested negative advertising in focus groups finds that the first response is negative back, which is, you shouldn't be doing that, and I think worse of you for having done that. So the question is, through all of that, and so you understand that you're saying all that negativity about yourself. You're actually you put a negative ad on the air, you're making people think something negative about you, that you did that. It still could easily be worth it if it really lands with a very solid blow. And so the attacks that were run against Mr. Well, let me take one step back. We ran some ads in the 2004 election, and you and I have talked about this before. We were losing support rapidly to the Conservatives, especially in Ontario. And we learned from our research that those people didn't know very much about what the Conservative platform was. And so, for example, we were losing the votes of women who did not know that Mr. Harper did not support a woman's right to choose, that he had supported the war in Iraq, that he was less than wildly enthusiastic about our healthcare system. And so we put together an ad that showed people those things, pretty compellingly visually, so pretty graphically, made the point. And again, in the focus groups, people said, I don't like those ads, but when they'd seen the ad, they couldn't vote Conservative anymore because they had that information now about their platform. So that's a platform-based ad. But I would also argue that probably the ads against Mr. Dion and Mr. Ignatieff were very effective as well, but they were more personally based. They went more to their capacity to be leader. They questioned whether Mr. Dion was actually a leader, in a similar style to what they're doing to Justin Trudeau now. And with Mr. Ignatieff, they said, this guy's really about himself, and he's not about Canada, and he's not about you. And if people believe that, they're going to have a hard time voting for that person. So I don't know that one is more effective than the other, but I know that if you miss the mark on an issue ad, you've just missed the mark. Whereas if you miss the mark on a personal attack ad, people can really start to think some awful things about you. And of course, the classic example of that is the Jean Chrétien ad from 1993, which the Conservatives used facial images of him that were designed to make him look as if he would be an embarrassment as leader. People concluded that they were making fun of a physical disability of Mr. Chrétien, and if they had any hopes of recovery, they didn't after that commercial ran. So that's an example of where on a personal attack, you better hit it where the public thinks it's right.
My recollection of that ad, and we're going back 20 years now, was that it actually worked. The public started to think this is an attack ad against a guy based on his character and based on potentially, how he looked and a certain disability, but that it initially started to work until Conservatives got cold feet and said, that ad makes me uncomfortable, we shouldn't have done that. Does that ring true for you?
I don't remember those exact details. What I do know is that the people who made the ad have always insisted that the ad would have worked had it been allowed to run. And that Ms. Campbell panicked and pulled it prematurely based on the backlash that was out there against it. I have a little trouble believing that they knew it was working and still pulled it, because they were in such desperate circumstances that had they thought it was working, I think they would have taken any amount of backlash and condemnation in order to have it still work. I think that my colleague on the Insiders panel, Jamie Watt, makes the point quite tellingly about the importance of context in these things. And if you run a negative ad at a point where you are looking like you are strong politically yourself and you're okay politically, then it's more likely to be received as fair comment on the political situation. Whereas if you run it, as most parties or candidates do, only when you are desperate and evidently desperate, then it comes out in that context and people receive it that way. And they say, well, they'll just say anything at this point. And so the context overwhelms the content. I think that's probably also what was happening to the Conservatives back in 1993.
Sadly, that is a perfect segue for me to take you to the next example of these things that I want to talk about, and you know where I'm going now. In 2006, when it looked like the Liberals campaign that you were running was in a hopeless situation, you guys put some ads out there talking about soldiers in the streets, and Stephen Harper is going to essentially bring a fascist dictatorship to Canada. I'm exaggerating just a little bit here. Is that basically what happened? You guys wanted to kind of scare the you-know-what out of people, but you overreached?
Well, so that's an important case study because it's often referred. So that's a really interesting ad. It never aired. It's a good test case. It never aired.
But the media got a hold of it.
It was inadvertently posted to the Liberal website, but it was never part of a media buy. Not, I'll be honest, because I didn't think it should be part of a media buy, but because cooler heads in our campaign prevailed and pulled it back. Because in keeping what the Conservatives who did the Chrétien ad might say about that ad, the Soldiers in the Streets ad tested through the charts in focus groups.
People liked it.
Well, they didn't like it, but they thought it was a devastating point to make against Mr. Harper. But you're right. We were in a context where people said, by God, the Liberals are cratering in the polls after the RCMP have launched their investigation into the Ministry of Finance. The Liberals are now cratering in the polls. Now they're going to be coming negative. And so there was this expectation. People were waiting. When do the negative ads come? And they were sitting poised for them. And so, A, we had the context problem that we've just been talking about. And second of all, we overreached with the content, and we went to a place where people wouldn't accept it as fair comment. Certainly the media and observers wouldn't accept it as fair comment. And it got, and that whole exercise learned a lot from that, because the ads that we did have on the air, that one didn't go on the air, but the ads that we did have on the air ultimately worked, but they took a longer to start working than they normally would have because of the overhang of that controversy.
So context is key in all of these situations.
Very much so.
Well, that harkens back to 2004, I guess, in the United States, when John Kerry was the Democratic presidential nominee, and he had some former, I guess, Vietnam vet colleagues who started to take out ads saying that his whole record was a lie, and that all of this business about him being a Vietnam War hero wasn't true. And they called themselves the Swift Boat Veterans for whatever.
Yeah, truth, I think, yeah.
For truth, yeah. So we have a new word now. You've been swift-boated. Yeah. But those ads seemed really unfair and seemed like they were overreaching, and yet were very effective in portraying Kerry as a guy who lied about his record. Why did they work?
They worked because the Republicans were not afraid of the beautiful people in salons criticizing them for running it, and they ran it relentlessly. And they did something that's very interesting. And if you think about it in the context of this ad, whether this ad is accomplishing that same objective, they said, John Kerry is running on his war record. This is a signature part of his offering for president, and we're going to destroy it. We're going to blow it up. We're not going to concede that to him, that territory, and fight on other turf. We're going to go after what he thinks is his strongest attribute and blow it up and leave him with nothing. And so they knew that to the extent that in a war environment, to the extent that they could diminish his credentials as a commander-in-chief, that they actually had to diminish his credentials as a commander-in-chief, and to the extent that they did that, he'd be less likely to be elected. I draw that back to this commercial about Trudeau, and whatever conclusions one might draw from the information in there, is that really striking at the heart of Justin Trudeau's appeal to Canadians? Is that really undercutting the core element of what is attracting to him? And well, I don't think it is.
That's the key follow-up here, because Kerry lost that election in part because he said, these ads are so ridiculous and not believable, I'm not even going to waste any money responding to him. And that was a mistake. He should have, and by not doing so, he let the other side frame him in a very negative way. So your advice to Justin Trudeau, if I'm reading between the lines here, is these aren't similar, so you don't need to blow your brains out responding?
Well, I don't think they're similar, and I don't think they're potentially as damaging. But let's understand. I mean, I think it would be wise of the Trudeau campaign to learn what these ads are communicating to voters, if anything, about him. And my view in politics is that an allegation that your opponent makes about you that you do not rebut is an allegation you have accepted.
So you have to rebut it.
If you care about it. I mean, they may have made a point that nobody cares about, in which case, why waste the energy and the oxygen fighting it? But if they made an important point that is going to damage you, and it's rebuttable, rebut it.
How?
Well, it could be, you could go at that any number of ways. You could produce a different kind of ad altogether that indirectly addressed the issues that have been raised by them. If the fundamental point is he tough enough? Right? There's ways to demonstrate his toughness and his...
I think he participated in a pretty famous boxing match once upon a time.
That even may be one example. Another example, and this is where I would have gone probably if I was John Kerry, is what does this tell us about the character of the people creating the ad? So rather than have a fight about the substance of the ad, you turn it into a character definition issue about the people issuing the ad. John Kerry did go to Vietnam. He did serve with distinction. He did offer up his life for that country, and George Bush and Karl Rove thought it was okay to demean that, right? That could have become a very telling character question in that race. But one way or another, yeah, you have to respond.
David, I got a minute left here, and one of the things I've never understood about political advertisements is they don't follow the same rules as, say, the private sector does. And by that I mean you would never see Air Canada take an ad out saying, fly us because we crash a lot less than Porter. And you'd never see Porter take an ad out saying, fly us because Air Canada planes crash all the time and ours never do. Because all that does is create a seed of concern and doubt about the safety of airlines in general. Why don't political parties seem to be similarly deterred from creating an impression in the public's mind that you're all a bunch of terrible people by running all these terrible ads?
Well, I guess one conclusion could be that politicians are inherently worse people than business people, or that they're not as smart as business people.
I'm not saying that. I'm just wondering.
I'm just, I think and Alan Gregg wrote a thoughtful piece about this in the paper today, and I never disagree with Alan because he's really, really smart. But in this case, I would say one critical difference between business and politics is that in politics, at the end of 28 or 35 days, somebody wins and everybody else loses. And some group of people gets to govern the country for 4 years and everybody else gets to go home. And I think that if you had that kind of a definitive judgment on a set date about hamburgers, you'd find different behavior by McDonald's and Burger King as well. And so that, I think, is a critical difference. They're in it for the long term, and they have as much interest in growing the category as they do in growing their own share of the category. We're not interested tactically in growing the share. We're interested in getting the biggest share we can by a set finite date.
And the result is half the people don't vote.
And the result is ultimately half the people don't vote, but they don't eat hamburgers either.
That's David Herle from the Gandalf Group. Always appreciate your time here at TVO. Thanks, David.
Thanks for having me on. Always interesting.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.